What happens when a global celebrity walks onto a live television set believing the rules don't apply to them? Not when the cameras cut. Not when the questions get difficult. But in the very first moments, when respect is expected, and none is given. That morning, the studio felt different. The air inside was warm, almost stifling, the kind of artificial heat that clings to your skin beneath bright broadcast lights. The audience filed in quietly, murmuring to one another as they took their seats, coats folded over arms, phones silenced by ushers who'd done this routine 1,000 times. On the surface, it was just another live show. Another episode. Another interview. But something in the room felt tight. Crew members exchanged subtle glances as they adjusted microphones and repositioned cameras. A floor manager whispered instructions into a headset, her voice tense despite the practiced calm. Even the band, usually relaxed, joking among themselves, sat unusually still. Behind the desk, Piers Morgan reviewed his notes. He'd interviewed heads of state, war correspondents, celebrities at their highest and their lowest. He was no stranger to confrontation. But as he flipped the final page and straightened the stack with a tap against the desk, there was a sense, faint, instinctive, that this wouldn't be a routine conversation. The red light was still off. 30 seconds to air. Piers rolled his shoulders back slightly, loosening tension he didn't consciously remember picking up. He glanced toward the side entrance, where the guest would emerge. Then the doors opened. She didn't enter so much as arrive. Meghan swept onto the set surrounded by an entourage that moved like a protective barrier, publicist, assistant, stylist, all orbiting her as if gravity bent in her direction. Her heels clicked sharply against the polished studio floor, each step confident, deliberate, uninterested in the room she was stepping into. She didn't look at the audience. She didn't acknowledge the crew. She didn't slow. The chatter in the studio died down, replaced by an uneasy hush as heads turned, eyes following her path to the chair opposite Piers's desk. She sat. Crossed her legs. Adjusted her jacket. And waited. No smile. No nod. No acknowledgement that she was a guest in someone else's space. Piers stood. It was instinct. Courtesy. Muscle memory built over decades of television. He stepped out from behind his desk and extended his hand, his voice warm, measured. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Meghan glanced at his hand, not quickly, not dismissively, but slowly, as though considering whether it was worth the effort. Then her eyes returned to his face, cool and unreadable. Let's just get this started, shall we? The hand hung there for half a second too long. A ripple moved through the audience. Someone shifted in their seat. A cough echoed louder than it should have. The cameras captured everything, the pause, the refusal, the subtle tightening of Piers's jaw as he withdrew his hand and returned to his seat. He smiled. Professionals always do. Absolutely, he said, settling in. So, you've been making quite a few headlines lately. I thought we could talk about some of the statements you've made in the press. Her posture stiffened instantly. Statements, she said. You mean my truth? The word hung in the air. Piers tilted his head slightly, his tone calm, almost gentle. Some people might call them claims when they can't be independently verified. A flicker crossed her face, irritation, sharp and fast. For instance, he continued, glancing at his notes, you've spoken about feeling isolated. Yet records show you had a full staff. You've mentioned being unsupported, despite multiple people whose job it was to support you. Can you help us understand that disconnect? The audience leaned in. Meghan leaned forward too, but where the audience was curious, her posture carried something else. Condescension. Control. You wouldn't understand, she said coolly. You've never been in my position. You've never dealt with what I've dealt with. Piers didn't interrupt. He waited. Let the words settle. Perhaps not, he replied evenly. But I have interviewed thousands of people from all walks of life. Refugees. Survivors of war. People who've endured unimaginable trauma. Her eyes narrowed. And when those experiences are compared, he added, carefully, some viewers might question the scale of hardship being described. Her face flushed. Are you seriously comparing me to refugees? She snapped. Are you actually doing that right now? The temperature in the studio seemed to rise. I'm providing context, Piers said. You're speaking to an audience of people who face real struggles every day. People working multiple jobs. People who can't afford healthcare. And when they hear someone living in extraordinary comfort describe their life as unbearable, it can be difficult to relate. The words landed hard. Meghan stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor, the sound cutting through the studio like a blade. Gasps rippled across the audience. Somewhere off camera, a producer stiffened. You have no idea, she said, her voice rising. What it's like to be scrutinized every single day. To have everything you say twisted. To have people like you sitting in judgment. Piers gestured calmly toward the chair. Then help me understand. That's why you're here. She didn't sit. Instead, she pointed at him, finger trembling with restrained fury. You've already made up your mind. This whole thing is a setup. You brought me here to tear me down. Silence. The cameras rolled. Nobody is tearing you down, Piers said. I'm asking questions. That's what journalists do. Her breathing was shallow now. If you can't explain your public statements, he added, perhaps you shouldn't make them. How dare you, she hissed. You're nothing but a bully with a microphone. Piers raised an eyebrow. A bully, he repeated. I gave you a platform. An invitation. And instead of engaging, you're throwing insults. The audience murmured. Meghan's hands shook. I don't need this, she said. I came here as a courtesy. A courtesy? Piers echoed, surprised. You agreed to come. And asking questions isn't mistreatment, it's an interview. You're twisting everything I say, she snapped. I'm repeating your words, he replied. If that makes you uncomfortable, the murmuring grew louder. Meghan turned toward the audience, her voice dripping with contempt. These people don't know me. They believe whatever garbage the media feeds them. They're sheep. The studio gasped as one. Even the band froze. Piers leaned back slowly, disbelief etched across his face. You just called my audience sheep. Off camera, her publicist made a frantic cutting motion across their throat. Too late. I didn't mean it like that, Meghan backtracked weakly. How did you mean it? Piers asked. Her silence was answer enough. And in that moment, as the audience shifted, as the cameras zoomed tighter, as the atmosphere thickened with something dark and irreversible, everyone in that studio realized the interview had crossed a line it would never come back from. Piers looked at her, steady and unflinching. You want all the benefits of fame, he said quietly, without any accountability. Meghan reached for her purse. I'm done. Piers glanced at the clock. We're 15 minutes into a scheduled hour. She smirked. Watch me. She turned toward the exit. And just before she took that first step, before the walkout that would echo across headlines and timelines, Piers stood and asked one final question that stopped her cold. Do you think this behavior helps your cause, or exposes it? She turned back slowly. Her face twisted with rage. And the room held its breath. Meghan didn't answer right away. She stood there, half turned toward the exit, one hand gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. The studio lights reflected off her face, catching the faint sheen of sweat along her temple, a detail the cameras didn't miss as they slowly pushed in. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. Not rage. Not arrogance. But uncertainty. Then it vanished. She straightened, lifted her chin, and turned fully back toward Piers. "And what exactly do you think you're seeing?" she demanded, voice sharp, theatrical, pitched just high enough to command the room. "Please. Enlighten us with your infinite wisdom." A low murmur rippled through the audience. Some leaned forward. Others crossed their arms. This was no longer curiosity, it was anticipation. Piers didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesture. He didn't rush. "I'm seeing someone," he said quietly, "who wants to be believed without question. Praised without scrutiny. And when challenged, even slightly, collapses into anger and blame." Each word landed like a measured strike. The room felt smaller now. The heat more noticeable. Even the hum of studio equipment seemed louder in the silence that followed. Meghan laughed, a short, brittle sound. "You are a vile, disgusting human being," she spat. "And I hope everyone watching knows what a snake you really are." The audience gasped again, louder this time. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. Someone muttered an incredulous, "Wow." Piers didn't flinch. "I've been called worse by better people," he replied calmly. But when someone resorts to personal attacks instead of defending their positions, it tells everyone exactly what they need to know. Meghan's eyes darted around the studio, scanning faces, searching for validation, or maybe an escape. Her publicist hovered just off camera, lips moving urgently, hands trembling as they whispered damage control that wasn't being heard. "No," Meghan said suddenly, louder, more frantic. "I want everyone to hear this." The publicist froze. "Piers Morgan is a hack," Meghan announced, pointing directly at him. "This show is a joke. And anyone who takes him seriously needs to have their head examined." The insult hung in the air, sour and heavy. "Are you quite finished?" Piers asked, his tone dangerously calm now, the kind of calm that signaled he was done playing defense. "Not even close," she snapped. "You sit here every day judging people, pretending you're some moral authority. But you're nothing. A failed journalist who couldn't make it in America, so you came crawling back here." A few audience members hissed. Others shook their heads. The tide was turning, visibly, palpably. Piers smiled thinly. "I've worked successfully in both countries," he said. "But thank you for the attempted insult. Anything else before you storm off my set?" "My set?" Meghan laughed bitterly. "This isn't your set. It's a soundstage owned by a network that pays you to spew garbage." "I own my integrity," Piers replied evenly. "Can you say the same?" For the first time, Meghan had no immediate response. Her mouth opened. Closed. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. The publicist tugged at her arm again, harder now. "We need to stop," they whispered urgently. Meghan shook them off. "This is absurd," she said, regaining volume if not control. "I came here in good faith and you ambushed me." "I asked questions," Piers repeated slowly, deliberately. "About statements you made publicly. If that's an ambush, then every interview ever conducted is an ambush." The audience murmured in agreement now. Heads nodded. A quiet clap began somewhere in the back and was quickly shushed by an usher, but the message had landed. "You know what?" Meghan said, voice trembling with fury. "I feel sorry for you. You're bitter. Angry. You can't stand to see other people happy or successful." Piers chuckled softly. "I'm not the one having a meltdown on live television," he said. "But please, continue with the armchair psychology." That did it. The breaking point didn't arrive with a scream, it arrived with a sudden, violent motion. Meghan reached up and ripped the microphone from her collar. The sharp snap of the wire echoed through the studio as the battery pack clattered against the floor. A collective flinch ran through the room. Crew members instinctively moved forward, then stopped, unsure whether to intervene. "I'm done," she shouted. "I'm done with this charade. I'm done with you. And I'm done with this pathetic excuse for a show." She threw the microphone down. It hit the floor with a hollow thud. Then she turned and marched toward the exit. Her publicist scrambled after her, muttering apologies to the crew, face pale with panic. The audience sat frozen, stunned into silence by the sheer implosion they just witnessed. Piers stood. "Thank you," he called after her calmly, "for confirming everything I suspected. This was truly enlightening." Meghan spun around one last time, fury radiating off her. "You haven't heard the last of this, Piers," she snarled. "I promise you that." "I'm sure I haven't," he replied evenly. "I imagine you'll be on another show tomorrow, blaming me and playing the victim. It's what you do best." With a sound somewhere between a scream and a growl, Meghan shoved through the heavy studio doors. They slammed shut behind her. The echo lingered. For a moment, no one moved. Then Piers exhaled slowly and turned back toward the audience. He straightened his tie, composed once more, as if resetting himself after a storm. "Well," he said lightly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "That went about as well as expected." The studio erupted. Applause. Laughter. Shocked murmurs. Some people stood. Others simply stared, trying to process what they'd just seen. Piers returned to his seat and shuffled his notes. "I genuinely invited her here to have a conversation," he said, speaking directly to the camera now. "I wanted to give her a chance to explain her perspective. But as you all witnessed, the moment anyone questions the narrative, the response becomes hostility." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I've interviewed some of the most controversial figures in the world," he continued. "Politicians caught in scandals. Celebrities at their lowest points. Even they could sit in that chair and answer questions." The empty seat across from him seemed to glow under the lights. "But what we saw today," he said, "was someone so accustomed to praise, so surrounded by yes people, that basic accountability felt like an attack." The audience listened, rapt. "I don't take pleasure in what just happened," Piers added, more quietly. "But it was necessary." The camera tightened on his face. "Because we live in a world where some people believe fame puts them above scrutiny. And that's dangerous." Applause rippled again, louder now. Off camera, phones were already lighting up. Producers whispered urgently into headsets. Social media feeds were exploding in real time. And behind those slammed doors, somewhere in the corridor, a furious celebrity was already plotting her next move. What no one in that studio realized yet was that the fallout from this moment was only just beginning. The studio was still buzzing. Even after the doors had slammed shut behind Meghan, even after the echo of her heels had disappeared down the corridor, the energy she left behind lingered like static in the air. Conversations overlapped in hushed bursts. Audience members leaned toward one another, eyes wide, replaying the moment in real time. "Did she really just, I can't believe she said that, that mic, did you hear the wire snap?" Behind the cameras, producers moved with controlled urgency. A headset crackled. A stage manager whispered countdowns. The show had to continue. Live television didn't wait for emotional wreckage. Piers Morgan sat still for a moment longer than usual. Not frozen, composed. Thoughtful. He looked at the empty chair across from him. The indentation in the cushion. The microphone wire coiled uselessly on the floor, already being discreetly removed by a production assistant crouched low to stay out of frame. Then he leaned forward. "You know," he said, voice steady, measured, stripped of theatrics, "I don't enjoy moments like that." The audience quieted instantly. "I really don't." The camera eased in closer, capturing the subtle lines on his face, the seriousness in his eyes. "I invited her here because I believed there was value in hearing her side, directly, openly, without filters. I wanted a conversation. He paused. But what we just witnessed wasn't a conversation. It was something else entirely. He tapped his pen lightly against the desk, once, twice, a grounding habit. We live in a time, he continued, where asking questions is treated as cruelty. Where disagreement is labeled bullying. Where accountability is framed as persecution. The audience nodded. Some folded their arms. Others sat straighter, engaged. And that, Piers said, should concern all of us. The camera cut briefly to the audience, a middle-aged man nodding thoughtfully, a young woman whispering, exactly under her breath, an older couple holding hands, expressions grave. I've interviewed people who've lost everything, Piers went on. People who've survived war. People who've buried children. And they still found the strength to explain themselves without attacking everyone in the room. He gestured subtly toward the empty chair again. What happened today wasn't strength. It was entitlement colliding with reality. Applause broke out, not explosive, but sustained. Earnest. Piers raised a hand gently, allowing it to continue for a beat before bringing it down. Now, he said, exhaling softly, we are going to reset. The tension shifted. This show isn't about meltdowns. It's about stories that matter. People doing real work. Conversations worth having. He straightened his notes. And speaking of that, the lights softened slightly. The music cue rolled. Joining us now, Piers said with genuine warmth, is someone who embodies exactly that. An extraordinary young man who started a charity at 16 years old, a charity that has now fed over 10,000 homeless people. The audience responded immediately, applause, this time hopeful, cleansing. Please welcome James Richardson. James walked onto the set with a modest smile, hands clasped briefly in front of him. He shook Piers's hand firmly. Deliberately, a small gesture that didn't go unnoticed by anyone watching. Thank you for being here, Piers said. Thank you for having me, James replied. And thank you, Piers added with a wry smile, for being willing to sit in that chair after all that. James chuckled lightly. I'm not worried, he said. I came to answer questions. The audience laughed, tension finally breaking. As James spoke about his work, the early mornings, the cold nights, the faces of people who hadn't eaten in days, the contrast became impossible to ignore. The studio felt different now. Quieter. Heavier in a way that mattered. I've seen real hardship, James said thoughtfully. And while everyone's pain feels real to them, perspective matters. When someone is sleeping on concrete in winter, it changes how you see complaints. Piers listened, nodding slowly. Well said, he replied. The rest of the show unfolded smoothly. A chef demonstrated affordable meals for families struggling with rising costs. A doctor discussed new treatments offering hope to patients long ignored. Laughter returned. Then thoughtfulness. Then calm. By the time the final segment wrapped, the chaos of earlier felt almost surreal, like a storm that had passed, leaving clarity in its wake. As the show drew to a close, Piers delivered his final remarks. It's been an eventful morning, he said lightly, but I hope you'll remember not just what shocked you, but what mattered. The camera tightened once more. Accountability isn't cruelty. Questions aren't attacks. And disagreement isn't hatred. Applause rose again, strong and unified. We'll see you tomorrow, Piers concluded. Same time, same place. The credits rolled. But the story didn't end there. Backstage, the atmosphere was electric. Phones buzzed non-stop. Assistants scrolled furiously. Producers compared trending charts in disbelief. It's already everywhere, one said. Clips are going viral. Millions of views. Half are furious, another added. Half are cheering. Piers loosened his tie, accepting a glass of water from a crew member. Let them argue, he said calmly. The footage speaks for itself. Should we release a statement? The producer asked. Piers shook his head. Release the full interview. No edits. No spin. Across the city, and soon, across the world, screens lit up. Headlines clashed. Talk show host crosses the line. Celebrity meltdown exposes entitlement. Most shocking walkout in live TV history. Social media erupted. Some defended Meghan passionately. Others replayed the footage frame by frame, pointing out every interruption, every insult, every moment she lost control. But one thing was undeniable. People were watching. They were talking. They were choosing sides. And somewhere, far from the studio lights, a narrative had cracked, not because of cruelty, but because it couldn't survive scrutiny. Piers Morgan sat alone for a moment after the crew began clearing the set. The chair across from him was empty again. He looked at it thoughtfully. If your story is true, he murmured to no one in particular, you shouldn't fear questions. He stood, jacket over his arm, and walked off the set. Behind him, the lights dimmed. And now, it's your turn. You've seen the confrontation. You've heard the questions. You've witnessed the fallout. So what do you think? Was this accountability? Or was it too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments, we're reading every single one. If this story kept you watching until the end, make sure to like the video. Subscribe for more cinematic deep dives into the moments that shook live television. And share this with someone who needs to see what happens when fame meets scrutiny. Because in a world full of noise, the truth doesn't need protection. It just needs the lights turned on.